Today we're hosting Silvia, who is a product manager at TomTom. She will be telling you about the internal TomTom's developer experience. So if we have some questions, just raise your hand. We will hand in the mic. And also for the people watching us online, if you have some questions, there will be a link in the YouTube comments that you can use to ask your questions, and Silvia will answer them a bit later. So yes, enjoy and give it up for Silvia.
Thank you for having me. Okay, welcome everybody. It's quite a feeling also for me to have you here. It's been a while since I don't do these lectures or face-to-face meetings, so I hope you will be helping me here, because today we're going to spend 1 hour and a half together, and this is not just a lecture of a presentation. I hope you can ask questions and make it a little bit informal and interactive. So let's get started. As I mentioned, my name is Silvia, and I'm one of the product manager in TomTom developer experience, and today I thought that I might share with you some details about some initiatives I'm leading in my role, but also in my department and in TomTom, and I'm here just to deep dive into those topics. So we're going to walk together into the two topics of today, developer productivity and flow. I'm going to walk you into how we define productivity, what initiatives we're currently leading, what metrics we are exploring, also to see if there's an interest in some of you to start using some of the metrics, or maybe in your future career, in your work experience, you might use some of the metrics, or it might be good to know that they exist. And also another really cool initiative about Backstage. Not sure if you're aware about what Backstage is, but I do expect that everybody knows about Spotify. So spoiler alert, we will be covering one of the products that Spotify is donating to the engineering community. And yeah, I'll suggest to get started. So before deep diving into the topics, I wanted to share a little bit more about me, also to make it more personal so that you know how to reach out to me, or also what you can reach out to me for. I'll start with an easy topic. I'm originally from Italy, so you can understand here in the Netherlands how I'm struggling with the weather and how I'm still getting settled. I've been living here for 6 years, but I'm originally from the south of Italy, where winter doesn't exist at all. So I'm still getting used to. I don't have an engineering background. I have a background in economics and econometrics. I did my master here in Rotterdam, actually. And yeah, I started working as a project manager, then I joined TomTom as a project manager, then I shift into product management, and yeah, still living my best experience at TomTom. So looking forward also to share more about my work experience, the initiatives, and my role here. But yeah, that is what I would like you to know for now about my work experience, but also a little bit more personal, because I also joined Codam 2 years ago, because after I graduated, I was really looking forward to share my experience and to share those advice that I didn't have when I did my master. So if there's anything you want to know about getting started in the work experience or finding the right job when you start, I'm also here to help, right? I've offered some mentorship. I also joined sometimes a technical review here, but I'm here to help, right? So for any questions, I'm also curious to see what you're up for, what you're doing, what you're thinking of in the future, so feel free to reach out. And if you don't find any topics in the work background, I'm also sharing here some details about myself, if I may, just to, again, to make it more informal. Again, originally from Italy, best country in the world, if I may. You see the food, the weather, sports, everything is there. You can drive without a bike, so everything you want to know about me, I leave it also here in the slides, also available on YouTube now, but you can have a look. If you want to reach out for also non-work related topics, I'm here. So with that said, if there is one thing I want you to remember from this presentation is actually this slide. So how to reach out to me. So if you want to know more about TomTom, the company, the products, or what we are discussing today, because I'll make a short overview, but if you want to follow up, reach out, I'm also here. If you want to know about developer experience, because it's a really broad topic, I tried to narrow down the scope here to some initiative, but if you also Google some articles or if you watch some podcasts, it's also a hot topic now in the industry. So if you want to have a talk about it, if you want to know more about any related topics, I'm also here. And also, as I mentioned before, what's after Codam? Because if you need some help, if you want to talk about some people that are already in the industry, especially like I'm constantly working with developers, engineers, if you want some tips or if you want to know what's around, I'm also happy to help. If you have some ideas about a new product, because I'm a product manager, but I'm extremely curious. So if you're thinking also on creating your own product, your own startup, and if you want a second pair of eyes, I'm also here because I have that genuine curiosity, so if there's anything I can do to help or to review it, don't hesitate to reach out. And last but not least, if you ever want to plan a holiday in the south of Italy, you can count on me for that. Best food, best place to go, so don't hesitate to reach out. But yeah, enough said, so let's jump into the real topic of today. So why I want to mention these two topics, because it's easy to present, because it's fun, because I love these ideas, but also because I thought that it's something useful for you to know, right? If you are considering to start a career as a developer, as an engineer, those are two hot topics that are now discussed in some industry, but also in some companies. And in TomTom, I like to think that we are pioneers in this domain because we've been testing the metrics for some time. We've been exploring backstage with a product that other companies are also using. So I want to share more details about that. Since, I mean, we're still on YouTube, so I will not share all the details, but I'm happy to follow up afterwards. Now, what I would like you to remember and why I'm mentioning this idea is also to try to teach you what are the questions that I'm trying to ask myself in my role, right? So no matter what career you will start or what assignment you're also doing, these are some questions that might help to understand the problem, to understand the context. So what I'm going to do now in this hour is walk you through these questions and explaining how I get to the answers for those two initiatives. So I'll share the slide afterwards, but keep those questions always in mind, because in developer experience, I'll explain in a minute what developer experience is, we constantly discover new things, we address common challenges, we have to address a lot of different use cases. So these are my guiding principles when I start a new research, when I need to understand the context, and I'm going to try to apply these principles with you today on those two topics. So I wouldn't read it too much, but it's pretty intuitive, like what is the problem, who is affected by this problem, where can we observe this problem, and also how often is this problem happening and when. Why do we care? Why it is worth our attention, not even investment. It's really like a genuine question. Why should we work on this? Why do we care? And then more into the context. Again, when do we observe the problem to also understand how do we want to move forward? So these are my guiding principles before I address any project or any solution. Because I really, if I don't have this inside, I don't know how to help the engineers in my team, or I don't know how to move forward with the ideas for my product. So you will see this slide or this question in this presentation often, because I really want to try to test this approach with you, to see if maybe it's useful for you in your assignment, in your daily work. I mean, I'm quite a maniac freak, so I also use it in my personal life, but I leave that up to you to judge if this is a good approach also in your daily work or in the assignment that you have. So let's start with the first topic. What is developer experience? Let's try to understand how we can apply those principles into what context. So developer experience, also known as DX, simply refer to everything that an engineer, a developer, an engineering team needs to do when it comes to getting access to tooling or using a certain software, finding certain documentation. It's the all experience. If you think of a new joiner, maybe also at Codam, as a new joiner, you might have access to some tooling or you might have some knowledge that you need to learn. So we are responsible in the internal developer experience for all the engineers, developers in TomTom. So we are here to help, to get access to tooling, but also to provide some best practices, some guidance into the integration that they might need to have. So at the moment, that's the only thing I wanted to remember. We are there for the experience of the engineers, and we are trying to help in them. So in my product area, I do not serve any external customers. When I say my customers, it's the TomTom employees, the engineers and the developers, which is the function of the internal product manager and internal developer experience. Now, again, why we exist Again, what is our purpose, why we are here? We are here, or at least I like to think, that we are here to make the engineer's life easier, right? Because without this centralized team, a lot of new joiners will be lost, or they don't know where to find this information. So we are here to help the teams to find everything they need, and also to have all the instruments they need to start their work. How we do that? Again, we provide the tooling, we provide the resources, the documentation, also the support, or sometimes we also connect the dots between different teams, because in TomTom we have more than 1,000 engineers, and they're working on separate problems. So we also play that gatekeeper role of centralizing the knowledge, so that if a team is experiencing in the past one issue, we know how to replicate it, or we know how to address the problem sooner and without reinventing the wheel. So that's why we exist, what we do, and of course, what is our ideal world? What is our vision? Of course, we want to have engineers that are productive, that are happy, and that they are that the job we do is also meeting their expectations. So they are here to deliver value to our external customers, or they're here to just enjoy their work, and we are trying to make it happen, right? In the mission, I mentioned to providing the tools to have everything they need to work, but also to make sure that they are productive, right? Because if they don't have everything they need, they cannot start their work, and they're just stuck. So that's why productivity comes in place, because we really want them to be able to focus on what matters to them, right? Could be experimentation, could be just working on their products or doing their work. We are there to help to get them to the right instruments and tooling, but could also be integrations, app, anything that they might need. And that's why I want to mention productivity, because again, why do we care? Why do we want them to be productive? Because we want them to be happy and productive. And why do we care? Because if we use productivity in the right way, it can lead the organization to success. At the team level, it can bring more clarity, more transparency. We can also influence the well-being, right, of the team, so because we want to have a productive team that is working well together, that they have everything they need. And here you see several factors, right? If an engineer, developer has all the instruments, we can also unlock more collaboration opportunities. We can learn more. We can expand our network and see what we can do together. How we can collaborate, and we make that collaboration as smooth, as efficient as possible, because we provide a set of standardized tooling that everybody is going to use. So you try to imagine, without this role, each team might have the autonomy to choose any tools they want, right? So we try to standardize and to learn what is the best tool, what is the best automation that they want to have in place. And we try to learn with them, to work with them, because most of the work we do is in collaboration with those engineers. They remain accountable for everything, but we do care about their well-being, about the fact that they are productive, right? And again, why we are not doing anything with these productivity metrics at this point, right? We're just using them as an instrument to make sure that we are reducing the time to onboard, right? That they have everything they need sooner. So again, you can read it too. There are so many reasons why you want to focus on productivity. And it's also a new domain in the industry, because there are not a lot of research also from the theory that covers productivity. So we are learning while doing, we're experimenting a lot. But one thing I want to mention for now is that the only reason why we care is because we want to have happier developers. So that's our goal and our indicator. So we are here to help the developers, engineers, and all related roles. Now, when it comes to productivity, of course, there is a question, how productivity is perceived. How would you define productivity in your life? You can also speak up, try to give an estimate, but I'm quite curious to know, without any context, what is productivity for you? What makes your day a good day? Any guess or any ideas? Also online, if you want to try to answer.
Finishing separate functionalities.
Mm-hmm.
Finish more functionalities in a day.
Yeah, finishing the work. More functionalities, different work. Anybody else? Say it again?
Meet the plan.
Yeah, meet the plan. Anybody, anything else? I'm sure we can come up with more definition. When do you feel that you are productive? When you get enough sleep, I like that. When you complete the work, when I complete the plan.
When I'm happy with what I did for the day.
When I am happy with what I did with the day, indeed. Anybody else? I'm sure we can come up with more and more definition, or even rethink of.
When you kind of have instructions, you know what to do. You're not in a position when you're trying to find out what's next step.
Okay, so understanding what you need to do, knowing how to do it, and then doing it. Or did I misunderstand?
What to do.
Just know what to do.
Instructions.
Yeah, instructions, okay. Not sure if there's anything else or still thinking, but think about it. Because one thing I learned every time I run a workshop with the teams or when I ask around is that productivity is pretty subjective, right? It really depends. Every time I try to understand more, I ended up with a new definition, right? And also it depends when you ask me this question, for example. But overall, there are several ways. I mean, those are some examples of answers I usually get, right? I think all the instruments to create the software that is available for the end users. Because, for example, one person said that I feel productive and I'm happy and satisfied about my work when the product I built is being used, right? Otherwise, yes, I finished my task, but what does it mean? Do I have an end to when I need to work on this item? Or having a good work-life balance, right? Could be sleep, could be like for nowadays that we work a little bit at home or in the office. That's also an important aspect, right? Having a good work life, so being able to manage both the work I need to do for my daily job, but also my personal life, it's important to be productive, right? Because if we have too many distractions or too much content switching, that's also influencing productivity. Or for an engineer, also not having so many distractions or meeting or being able to focus only on one thing completely and then repeat, right? There are several things that could happen, several factors that could influence how productivity is perceived, maybe also the weather, maybe also getting enough sleep or any other factors that are more in your daily routine or in your behavior and that might change, right? So the first question we had is, what is the right level of information that we can extract? What is the starting point to make sure we have a good baseline in how we can measure productivity? What are the things that we should take into account? What are the tools we can start analyzing to see productivity, right? And I'm going to walk you through, but we had to look at all the tooling when it comes to how the engineers collaborate or how I plan my work, right? Because part of my productivity is also based on how I make my checklist for the day, if I have a checklist, right? So we really need to understand what is the information that we can use to measure productivity, also without disrupting people's privacy, right? Because we are not interested in measuring productivity to assess what they're working on. We really want to see what we can do to make them more happy or to make them more productive. So that is the first question we had to ask. So how do we do that? What do we consider? How can we narrow down the scope? Because if we keep asking questions, what is productivity to you? We are never going to have a unique answer or a unique measurement or indicator. So we had to consider that. How not to measure productivity, and this, I mean, this is my personal view, but it's also documented. We should not use these metrics, right? So we're not tracking working hours. The amount of work you do, how many hours you are sitting on your desk in front of a laptop doesn't say anything about how productive you are, or also how many times you spend on a meeting or whatever, right? So that is not our baseline. And we also don't care about how we're using the browser because it's not telling enough. And we don't measure lines of code of number of commits. I don't know if you, what stage you are in your Codam program, if you started writing some code or if you're doing some programming activities, but that's not an indicator about how effectively you're doing your work or how you are running your day. So those are metrics we are not taking into account. The velocity, I'm going to explain what it means later, but we're not checking how fast you're completing a task, because this is not enough for us to understand how productive you are. Sometimes you can manage a complex task that takes weeks or days, and sometimes you can cover like really a small task that take few hours, or if you need like a few hours to understand what is causing your pipelines or your product not to work. So we're not taking those into account. Not analyzing how many tasks you complete, because it's also subjective how you structure your work. And we are not using productivity to measure performance, right? So we don't care about that. As I mentioned at the beginning, we just want to know how we can help to be more productive. We're not trying to understand how you are working or what is your performance from that. So those are a starting point. So how we had to do a lot of research, we had to narrow down the scope, we had to decide on what to focus, because productivity is a set of a lot of factors, and we need to pick and start testing some metrics. So here are some of the metrics we are considering. I'll cover some of them in a minute, but really high level. Time to onboard. So if we think of a new joiner, right? What is the journey from a new joiner or a person who also starts in the university? You might have access to some tooling, you might need to read some articles, you might need to fill in some survey. So time to onboard is here to measure how long it takes for your onboarding to be completed, right? So this is something we are testing, discovering to see, can we reduce the time to onboard? Can we make sure that a new joiner in the first week, he or she has everything it's needed for the onboarding when it comes to documentation, when it comes to access to tooling, and that is a good indicator for us also to see if there's something we can automate or if there's something we can do about it. So that is the first aspect, because if we can save that time, we expect that the new joiner can start doing something else or can start the actual work. So that is the first indicator. Code maintainability and coding effort is more technical metrics to see. So coding effort, how much time you are spending when creating a new code, opening a new pull request, and how much of that code gets thrown away or get wasted. So how much code you are creating, how many lines of code you are creating that becomes unmaintainable. Because that is an indicator that maybe you will have a waste in the future. Because if you're building something that you cannot change or you cannot reuse, then it will take a lot of time to debug and to understand what needs to be changed. Now, for this, the sake of time, I'm going to focus on the DORA metrics, flow efficiency, and the space frameworks, because they're really like hot topics now. And I want to share more details about what those metrics are. I'll start with the DORA metrics, because there in, I think, 2018, 2019, there was a great book who was published, Accelerate. And in this book, there was a study about the performance and the quality of the work of the engineering teams or high-performing teams in IT. So what is this research saying is that if we measure and improve these 4 metrics, we will be able to succeed as a company. Now, what are those 4 metrics? Lead time to deploy, deployment frequency, mean time to recover, and change fail rate. Now, I'll try to explain what they are. So deployment frequency is measures how frequently you are releasing a new change, how frequently you're pushing the code to production, or how quickly you can complete a task, if we keep it simple, right? So how often you are having a new update in your phone, right? I have an iPhone, and once in a while I receive those updates that I need to do, right? So I want to track how many of those I need to create, or how many updates I'm just bringing to my products, right? So that is deployment frequency, which is an indicator of speed, right? So how quickly I can do a certain task, just to keep it simple. Change fail rate is actually the opposite. Among those releases that I push to production, how many of those fail, right? So what is my change failure rate? Let's say I do 100 of releases in a month. That's great, it's quite a lot. But if I have 90 changes that fail, what can I infer, right? Maybe there's something I need to change. So I want to keep track of the change failure rate, especially because change failure rate is an indicator of stability. If something breaks in production or if something is not working, I do have a problem because maybe the users of my product will complain. They will not get access to my product, or if you're searching something in the browser, if you are planning to purchase an item, they will not be able to pay. They will complain. So that is why you want to keep change fail rate as low as possible, right? And that is an indicator of stability. Mean time to recover is also related to stability, and it indicates how quickly you can solve a bug or how quickly you can restore the service. So when when a customer is, or when you are a user and you're reporting an issue that you cannot log in the page, you might want to raise a case or report this issue. And from the other side, there will be somebody to fix the issue. So you want to be able to resolve that service degradation or incident in the shortest time possible. So that is what mean time to recover is. And last but not least, lead time to deploy, which is actually also my favorite metrics, indicates how long does it take in the entire flow of action. So when you receive a task, right? And here I want to first make an example that is intuitive for everybody. When you are asked to do something, when you receive a task, right? How long does it take for you to understand what is actually needed to be done when you actually get started, and how long does it take for you to execute the task and mark it as complete? So the lead time to deploy is actually measuring that. So how long does it take to execute the task, right? So that is an indicator also of speed, because you want to keep the cycle time short. And I'm going to make some example later. But long story short, those metrics were also called Accept KPIs or DORA metrics, because DORA stands for DevOps Research and Assessment, states that if you measure those 4 metrics and if you are able to improve them, there's also a causation in how you can improve as a company, right? So we decided to test it out in our teams and say, okay, can we measure that? What would it mean? Because if we start measuring, what can we infer from the data? So you might not end up starting your role as a developer, maybe not interesting, but I thought, okay, let's see how we can use those metrics when it comes to productivity and what we can learn. So if we analyze the DORA metrics, they are lagging indicators, meaning that they tell you where you are now. So based on the history, how many deployments were you able to ship to production, how many failures you record. They tell you everything about what you did in the past, but they don't tell you what to improve. And that's why flow, the other metrics measure about flow, can help you catching the inefficiencies before they have a bigger impact. So those are called leading metrics because they can tell you what you can do in the future. So it's more as an action you can take to influence those DORA metrics. And that's also how the research has evolved, because before there was this DORA research and the accelerated book that presented these 4 metrics, but they didn't tell you anything about what to improve. They give you some tips on capabilities, on what to focus on, what you need to change in the code, what principles you need to apply in the security level, but that's it, no more metrics, only the 4 metrics. So we decided to look deeper and see what kind of insights as developer experience we can get if we introduce flow. Because it was also hard for us to understand what can we recommend, what can we say to the teams, right, with those accelerated metrics. We can share some best practices, especially in the technical level, in the architecture, but we are not able to identify any improvements for the future if we don't start measuring more metrics, right? And back to the question, we understood the problem, we tested out, we find some metrics, but we said, okay, it's not enough. We need to have more metrics and we need to see how it goes. And that's why also the research has evolved. So the accelerated book also introduced another framework, which was called SPACE framework, satisfaction and well-being, performance, activity, communication and collaboration, and efficiency and flow. So here we are adding 5 new dimensions to 4 metrics who were pretty technical, and we are capturing more about productivity. I think some of you also mentioned some aspect of the satisfaction, right? I feel productive when I completed my plan, when I finished the work, when also when it comes to well-being, when I have a good work-life balance, or when I have enough sleep. So we need to consider those factors when it comes to productivity, because if something is not happening, then in those areas, also in the qualitative aspect, we will never know how to unlock collaboration opportunities or how to achieve more productivity. So we started measuring those, a lot of qualitative insight, a lot of surveys to see, okay, but how can we measure the well-being? Where do we want to be as a company? How do we want to use this data? And how can we effectively give the engineers and the developer an instrument that they can use, right? Because for those accelerated metrics, it was pretty intuitive for the developers to understand how to use it, but then they got stuck because they don't know what to improve. So they needed more metrics to play around with to understand how to improve. Now, for the sake of time, I'll not cover all the metrics, but here you find the example of the research, and you do have 3 layers. So this is also something that is changing. So the accelerated metrics, there were 4 metrics that you want to measure by team or by product, by service. Here you have 3 different layers. So the individual level. So everything starts with you. So what you can do as a team member, what practices you can have when you do review a code. Maybe you might have some experience in mobbing or pair programming, and you want to have some agreements in how you review the code or the work that needs to be done. So there's something at the individual level that can already make an impact on those metrics. Once we have more on the metrics, also on satisfaction, right? Because, for example, how can we make sure that you have everything you need to start the work, or that you feel excited about the work that needs to come? So that's why everything starts with the individual level. Then we move into the team, because again, there are some team dynamics that we might want to maximize in terms of what is working well, and also implement some of the metrics at the team level. And then a third dimension on the system. Now, system could be a component, could be a feature, could be a product, and that's measuring the system. So it's 3 dimensions: individual, teams, and system. I'll share the link if you're interested, but yeah, those are for each layer, you do have a metrics for satisfaction and well-being, performance, activity, communication and collaboration, and efficiency and flow. But that's only one part of the story, because yes, we're capturing some qualitative aspect, we're testing this space framework, but what about flow? Why we should add another dimension? Why we should add those leading actions that we were mentioning before? So again, why do we care, right? Well, because we know that we want to increase productivity, because we want to bring more focus in the teams, right? Because if you, also in your daily life, if your flow of activities is going well, you will be more productive. If you know before starting what you need to do, then you will start and you will see that you feel productive and that you can continue. Faster feedback. Faster feedback is really important, because when it comes to flow, and again, try to think of flow how the activities are moving until they are complete, right? So at some point, you might need some help, or you might get stuck with some task. If the flow is steady and if it's working well, you will also achieve faster feedback, because you will define up front when you will need help, and you will be able to find right away the person that needs to help or the documentation. So that's also important, because if you can reduce that waste or that waiting time, you will also be more productive. And then other factors for the improved morale, so the overall happiness, right? If you feel that you have everything in place, you will also be feeling happier and willing to do more. More flexibility also in how you work, right? Because if you have all the instructions, if you know what is needed, then you can plan your work and be more flexible in how you structure that. And then, of course, quality, right? Because even if we find the right speed or the right way of measuring and improving flow, we also don't want to compromise the quality. It doesn't matter if I release or if I ship hundreds of lines of code if they are not good at the quality level. So that is all the factors we keep into mind. And what we found out is that flow was exactly capturing all those aspects at the same time. And then I'll pause to see if there are any questions. But if there are, please feel free to interrupt me or just raise them in Slido. But that's how we ended up there. So when it comes to flow, again, there are a lot of metrics. I can share them offline. But what is important is how to get started, right? Because I'm sure you will not start now to having some of the flow metrics. Maybe in your future role, you will not be asked to get those metrics. But there are some things that you can introduce in how you are learning how to work, on how you're planning your work. I remember also when I was studying, I wish I had this because I was not really good at planning my work or at making sure that I had that I was following the plan. So it's called way of working agreement, and that's how it's defined. So actually you can, if you're working in a team, you can discuss it with your team. It's really an informal agreement on how you want to work together. Or maybe when you will join a team in your work, you will see that there are already some agreements, or if they're not, you can be pioneers and you can promote those way of working on some topics. Here I just listed a few because it was pretty intuitive to understand how we want to track our work and how we want to manage our work. Now, I'm not sure if you're using some tools to plan your work, if you will use, I think you might use Slack, right? Slack is one of the collaboration tools to share information or how the work is defined. Is there a document? Do we have a board where we have the sticky notes and we assign the work? So when you understand how the work is being tracked and what is the expectations, you can start defining and learning the work that you will be doing, right? If you implement some practices on how you manage your work, you will be able to be productive even before starting or before knowing what is expected from you. And that's also one of the things that you might learn when you start a job, right? A team is already working on other tasks. You want to work. What tools are you using to track the work? Do you have any practices in place to check? Do you have some daily stand-up, or do you do any meetings to see the work that needs to be assigned, or how is the work assigned, right? And once you have that, also planning. So how often do we plan the work? How do we assign the work? Do we have any objectives, or do we have a deadline, a big launch? So as soon as you align on how the work needs to be planned and where you can play a role, that will flow easily, right? Also on how to share the knowledge, right? Because here you're also learning to do pair programming, to share the knowledge, to review the project with somebody, and you can also agree on how you want to share the knowledge, or also for yourself, if you're doing some individual work, how do you want to learn, right? How much time you want to spend on learning new things or in sharing what you're learning. And last but not least, code reviews, because it's one of the technical measurement that is influencing the DORA metrics. You might want to know what is the expectations on the review process, right? So do we apply the 4 eyes principles when I write a code, I submit it, and then somebody else needs to review it? How can I be efficient? How can I demonstrate that I'm really good at doing reviews, and then I don't become the bottleneck when I need to review a lot of lines of code? So there are a lot of practices that you can learn, and the sooner the better, to make sure that you're productive and that you can provide impact, right? One example on the review process, or maybe if you read some emails, or if you have a long article to read. How long, do you know how long it takes if you need to write an email that is that big, 200 lines? It would take a certain amount of time, and maybe the action that you need to take is just a simple yes or no, right? So just as an easy example, if you keep the message shorter, or if you split it into parts, it would be much more efficient and easier for the other person to review it, right? Because you write their email, you send it, somebody review it, and then they send it back. Instead, if you need to write a page or a longer email, it will take more time for you to write it, and then for the other person to review it. That is one example, right, for the review process, where as a best practices you keep your pull request or your code short in size, so the less lines of code or the shorter size of the pull request, in order to allow the other person to review it faster, right? So those are a few aspects that will allow the flow, collaboration, and learning to move faster. So then again, I'm keeping it simple, but I can share more articles, I can follow up, I can also see how we do that. But those are just examples, right? So try to ask yourself, what are the principles you want to use? And it doesn't need to be for your work, but also in your daily life, how you're studying, how you're planning your work, any topics. And I think that concludes the topic on the metrics. Now, if you want to read more, here I'm sharing some books that I'm using that I found useful or that might cover some of the topics. I'll also share them offline. And those are like theory, and it explains the metrics. It explains also the way of working. Because, for example, I didn't have time to cover it, but some companies are also using Agile, right? The Agile framework. So could be Scrum, could be Kanban. Those are methodologies in the way of working that allow you to iteratively complete your work. So it's a practice. Instead of like writing a long document or working on a yearly plan, you break down the work and you make sure that you have milestones to achieve in a shorter time, right? Because if you have to work on a product for 1 year, a lot of things can change and you might be late and you will not know. But if you break down the work, you will see that you can achieve more by completing smaller steps. But yeah, here there are some articles also on how the teams structure themselves to achieve the flow, or how to achieve the flow of activities, how this needs to be implemented also in a big company or in a startup, how to think lean, how to think and how to apply flow. But those are books that also require some study and attention. And if you want something a little bit lighter, those are at least the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project, some really good books that describes a story around the company, and you will see that there are some incidents, there are some failures, and you see how the teams address those challenges. And if you see that the word DevOps is mentioned, I also shared the DevOps book that explains everything about the development, so the act of building something and then maintaining it, because there are some companies that have development team that only do development, and then they hand it over to some teams that needs to operate and maintain the application. But you also see nowadays that a lot of teams are doing all at once. They develop and they build it and they maintain it. So you might want to learn more about the practices. And they are definitely lighter than the one before. And if you want to know how the companies are working or dealing with those metrics and practices, it might be a good start. So that's it about the first topic. Now the second one, it's about Backstage. I also share more details about how we decided to call it. So this is one of the product that my team is owning. And again, let's try to approach this initiative to understand what is the problem, what were the user problem, why we started this initiative, what problem we are trying to solve, and how we get there. Because every time some users or some developers are experiencing an issue, we really need to understand the problem and understand how to replicate it and how we want to define our success criteria, why we think that what we are building is addressing exactly the problem they had. Now, in that sense, let's try to understand what was the problem. So in my daily work, I need to interview a lot of teams, a lot of engineers, and I need to understand if there are some common challenges. So almost last year, when asking some questions to the engineers about what is blocking you to be, actually no, let me rephrase it. Do you have any challenges in your daily work? Because I wanted to understand if there were any potential inefficiencies or what were the inefficiencies that might prevent them to execute their work, to be more productive, and to focus on what matters to them. Now, some of the topics were related to documentation, right? They mentioned that they couldn't find documentation, or there was an email about it, or I need to look it up, and long story short, too many portals, too many ways to find documentation, and it takes time if you don't know where to find, right? So this is not rocket science, right? The challenge is pretty simple. There were some challenges in finding documentation or in centralizing the knowledge in one place, and also lack of knowledge in who I can ask for, right? So imagine a lot of new joiners, but also members of the teams, or even in my case, if I don't bookmark some tabs, I'm losing the files I'm working on, right? So I really need to spend a lot of time in finding the documentation or even finding my order of thinking to find the document I need, right? And if you think at a big scale, like more than 2,000 people finding the same document is a big waste, right? So that was the challenge, but it was not so difficult to understand because it's fair, right? You want a simple way to find documentation and you want to manage everything in one place, right? So with that said, we thought, okay, this seems an easy problem, but hard to, how do we move forward? Because yes, people are struggling with documentation, but the documentation is there. So where to start? What do we want to do? We do a lot of research. We also as a developer experience, we also need to experiment a lot, right? So Backstage is a product from Spotify. It's the open source that they have to build an internal developer portal. Now, in the open sourcing model, you can contribute, you can create, you can use what they are providing. So Spotify created this product. It's the back end and the front end of what we have. And they donated to the community for future improvement. So they said, we had this idea in how to create a platform, a portal for everybody who wants to use it. You can install it, you can build your own plugin, you can use it in your company, and if you want to help, if you think that there's something we need to improve, you can also improve our product, right? So there are not a lot of technologies nowadays that are fully open source, but we wanted to try, right? First to use it in our company, right, in our teams to see, is this solving the problem, what we can do? Do we have any links in how this is improving the productivity? Can we make the developer's life easier? And how can we prevent that we are just introducing another portal that nobody would like to use or that will cause more work for us? Now, I'm happy to follow up how Backstage works from a technical perspective if you're interested, if you want to try. But there are a few things that were important in this research. So first, documentation, right? The challenge is that they couldn't find the documentation. They couldn't have a one-stop shop to find all the documentation or everything they wanted. And when looking around, we saw that there was so much automation and so much best practices that we wanted to have because we could manage everything in one place. We could automate more, and it was so easy to contribute. And we were not alone in this journey because a lot of companies were already using it. We could see and learn how they're using it. There was even a community around different people in the world that could share their experience and that could share their code too. Now I haven't, okay. So what Backstage allows you to do, so you can create, manage, and explore. Those are three key words that will come handy when you implement this platform, but you need to think that you can create something new in few seconds, and this is saving time. It's also allow you to be more productive, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel, because if you need to create a new product or a new software, there's a lot of things that you need to do in the company, right? Check if you're compliant to security, need some paperwork, and this is making your life easier. But if you already have your product and if you need to manage your products, it's allow you to manage the entire ecosystem in one place, right? So everything that you already have will be integrated there in one UI, and you can manage everything there in your daily work. And if you're looking for something new, you can also explore for new integration, or you can see what the other teams are doing. So those were some indicators that it was worthy the experiment. Again, those are the what you can do as a developer, but also why should a company use Backstage, right? You want to make, if you have a complex environment, if you have a lot to manage, you really want to be able to scale and to give your teams the instrument to have everything in one place that is still under control and manageable. And you want to leverage the power of open source because it's a great opportunity also for contributing across teams. This can unlock a lot of collaboration opportunities in the teams, right? So that's important to mention. Again, it's really customizable, flexible, you can do a lot of things. And at this stage, there was a lot of unknown. So we didn't know what we wanted to use it for, and we knew that it could partially address one of the challenges we have, but we needed to understand how to make it easy and intuitive for the developers. I'll share the link in why every team should try Backstage and why it's important to have it, because in this quick demo, you can also see that the challenge we wanted to address was already there, and they solved it. So that's why we wanted to move forward and to see how we can use it in our daily work, also within developer experience. Okay. Now, when it comes to the solution, we had to set some boundaries in what is actually Backstage doing for us, and how can we be not too much disruptive in introducing a new technology for the teams. So those are our guiding principles. So first of all, what Backstage can do for us, it can unify all the tooling, services, app, documentation in one UI. At this place, we don't plan to replace the existing tools we have, but we know that we can integrate them all. And that was important, because back to the problem, they were missing that one-stop shop place. So we wanted to unify the experience and create the go-to place, the one-stop shop for the teams to discover stuff, to find everything they need. I mean, I think now, if you ask me, if I need to search something, I'll still use the browser. I'll still Google the information, recipe, anything will be there. But for the teams, he wanted to see if Backstage could be the place for them. Why? Because we want to make their life easier in how they manage their application. So we wanted to give them exactly what they had before in a new UI, in a new user interface that can make their life easier. So do they see the value, or would they like to be as they were before, managing a lot of tabs or had to find the information? Because we need to constantly validate that what we are building will fit the problem need or will fit the user needs. And yeah, with the end goal, I'll let them focus on what matters, but also demonstrate that it's easier for them. It needs to have a purpose. We need to measure the value, right? Because otherwise, we don't want to introduce something that is not being used or that will end there. So yeah, those are our guiding principles. We decided to create a one-stop shop for some topics, because we had to identify the key features and where to start. How can we demonstrate that if we have the overview of what the teams are doing, the list of people, the list of applications that they own, the APIs that we can use, the documentation, we thought that by introducing these features, we could maximize the impact, and we can already let them playing around with the tool, because then we had to have a lot of metrics. Are they using it? Are they clicking on the pages? How are they using it? And how they would like to improve the content. So with the overall goal, again, so we wanted to create a one-stop shop. But how do we measure success? We wanted to make, again, the engineers more productive by giving them an instrument and a portal that could save them time, right? So the goal is the same as the metrics, that we were giving to the teams. Now we're giving them a portal, and with the same goal. So two different initiatives, but with the same goals of improving the efficiency, but also in this case, by bringing the engineering community together. And that's also why we changed the name from Backstage to Frontstage, because also like the Spotify community, they recommend to rename the technology name to something more familiar for the teams or to something more personal. Now, it was a mess to find out the name. The alternative were like Pizza Portal or other names. And we thought that Frontstage, since it also has a back-end and front-end, could be the name that we could use, right? To also highlight the goal we wanted to achieve, right? To really put the engineers on stage to let them solve the problem they raise, right? Because we are in this together, right? Most of our work, we work with the engineers and we build solutions for them, but we work as an enablement. So we really need them to be familiar with the problem, with the product, and to be part of the journey, right? So that's why we wanted to put them on stage to contribute to this goal, because we are owning the portal, but they can contribute. They can add the information, and it's fully self-service and automated. They can just like create, open the code, open the UI, and also from the front end, ask us to add more or suggest some improvement. So that's why this might solve a lot of the problems that were raised when it comes to finding documentation, finding the person that could help. Because in this journey, we will be all together creating this portal, and we will be successful only if everybody keeps using it. So this is a learning journey, because we are enriching the content. I think we release it end of January in production, and we're still learning and enriching the content with the help of the engineers. Are engineers happier? We don't know yet. Are they contributing to code? Quite a lot. They are, I mean, we are only 5 engineers maintaining this platform, but we have 10 and more people that are helping, enriching, and maintaining this portal. So we are getting there. But also by checking how the other teams are using it, it seems that yeah, we are really unlocking those collaboration opportunities. And we keep asking always the same question that I'm also going to ask to you. If there is one thing, or maybe not, but if there is one thing that you would like to see on a portal, what would that be? Because by keeping this narrow question, we will know how to maximize the impact and how to bring that feature. Because the answer to this question might change every time, right? So that is also how I link those preliminary research questions into one question. Because if you do ask the right question, you might be closer to the solution. So yeah, every time I ask this question to my colleagues, it keeps changing. Some of the answers were all the same, right? There was this hot topic about team composition, so not knowing who is doing what. And that seems a good way, right? Because if you ask this question and if everybody is answering the same, you're done, right? You know what you need to do. But yeah, but I mean, I wish I could have shown the video to also ask you this question. But try to think, like, imagine to have a portal, also at your work at Codam, right? You might have some interface that you manage. If there is one thing that you would like to see that might make your life easier, what would that be? And that kind of concludes the update I wanted to share. Any insights, any comments, any quick answer or to this question? Otherwise, we can close it and also move to Q&A if needed. Yeah?
For me, that would probably be what changes have been made lately that affect how something works. For example, if I've been on vacation, then suddenly everything is different in certain components, and then you have to read through documentation, and that's always the worst.
Yeah, that's true. So you want to know in general or for this portal?
Yeah, I don't know if that would be on the front page of an internal portal. That would be the thing that I would want.
Yeah. So there are two aspects. So when you install Backstage in your local machine, you customize your experience. So even if somebody else is implementing the change, it will not affect how you are using it. So you can decide whether to implement the same changes because the change is visible, but it will not be reflected in your local environment, right? However, the experience is also centralized. I don't use my local environment quite often. I use the link of the production environment. And when I see the changes, so first of all, we identify some code owners. So for example, you might own a space, right? You own your team space, and you identified your owner, and you have set the way of working agreement that I mentioned before, that nobody can touch your code or your space, right? So, and that's how it's set by default. Every time somebody update the content, create the content, or if we map the team, we identify at least one code owner, but ideally a team owner. So that will not change. And there are quite a lot of auto checks from a quality side, from the documentation, that if you push a change, you will need to update the documentation and the change will not be reviewed and approved, which is quite nice. But that's also, that is making our life easier when announcing changes or when we need to identify the owner, right? Because generally speaking, a change can impact a lot of users, right? This is not as disruptive because it's just an internal developer portal, so nothing can really break, but you have a point, right? Because you might want to contribute to the decision also on improving the UI, for example. I think dark theme mode, white mode, or any changes that change the content will not be possible. But at the same time, if I want to propose a change and you're on holiday, I will mark you as reviewer, and you will be notified that something needs your attention. And you will see from the UI that somebody is waiting for your action, which is quite cool when you're back on holiday, you don't know what to do, and there's the first things you check. Anybody else? I hope that answers your question. Yes. Yeah.
You mentioned about code maintainability.
Yeah.
Can you reiterate on that or maybe add more details?
Yeah.
How do you?
So code maintainability is an indicator of quality, right? So there are a few things that you can do to measure quality. So usually there are some tooling that give you some score on how maintainable is your code or how you are exceeding the expectations. So with some score like A, B, C, D, F. That measure quality. Now, when it comes to code maintainability, what we wanted to know is based on your programming languages, right? Maybe you work with C++, you work with Java. If you're working on a project and you're creating a code, how much code becomes not maintainable? So legacy work. So that you really cannot touch because it becomes too old, you didn't update it to the right version, to the new version. So we are trying to measuring in the products how many pieces of that code becomes unmaintainable because it contains some mistakes in the code or some errors that nobody reviewed and nobody checked, right? And ideally, we want to keep it low. So that's how code maintainability is defined and measured. How much code becomes too old and unmaintainable or contain some errors. And this is in the context, try to imagine that you need to build one product, right, and sell it to a lot of customers, right? Ideally, you want to make sure that everything is perfect because if you then need to scale and address all the fixes, all the bugs, you need to address the bugs 100 of times, right? So that's how we are introducing some metrics and also some indicators that you can be notified when somebody in the code is failing or it's running in the pipeline for too much time, right? Because if you keep the code small, that can be reviewed quickly, or if it's reviewed by more people, it will become maintainable, right? But I can share more details about how it's measured and what are the things that you need to take into account. But part of that also stems from what product you're building, right? Because maybe you are building something, but you don't like it and you throw it away. So it's up to you to decide, do I want to keep the code because maybe I will need it in the future and I want to maintain it, or should I just throw it away and never consider it again? Yeah.
And the tooling that is used for measuring the maintainability?
There are a few. There are like SonarQube, Tiobe. There are a lot of code quality tools. So I'll share the links. There are also some open source tools that you can check depending on the language that you use. Yeah, I'll share more. Because also I mean, at least in our company, we care about quality, but also security, right? Because we have a lot of checks that are also automated, right? To check vulnerabilities in the code or to check how we write the code, right? And that's why I mentioned before, we don't check the lines of code because some code is complex by default, but from a quality perspective, we need to make sure that everything is in place. So I'll share more later. Yeah.
And from the productivity point of view, maybe you can share your personal experience. What have you implemented that affected your productivity the most?
That's a great question, actually. Because I was the one who introduced this topic in the teams and in the company. And when I tested it, I was testing it for myself, right? Because I also wanted to see what is making me productive, what am I good at and what I'm not. So the key finding for me was that I didn't know what I was doing. because I was doing a lot, but I couldn't translate the work I was doing into the impact, right? At the end of the day, I was doing a lot. I was working 8 hours a day, even more, but doing a lot of tasks, but nothing in concrete or nothing that I was asked, right? So that it was the key, the first insight. I don't know what I'm doing, and I know that I can do better and more, right? Not per se more in quantity, but more in quality, right? I had to manage a lot of content switching because I was like doing a lot of meetings or dealing with a lot of topics, and that has proved that it was not helpful for me, right? Because I had like half an hour meeting and then moving to the next, but then at the end of the day, I didn't have enough time to do the work or to follow up, right? So the wait time that I also spent in that content switching, because maybe I was supposed to do something, but I was in another meeting and somebody else was waiting and they couldn't do anything without my task or my support or even simply asking a question, right? So I was able to kind of quantify that. And again, it's pretty subjective because it's up to me to see what it means and what I want to change. But also, I was able to measure how I was investing my time, meaning depending on the role, right? Some teams might spend 80% of the time in implementing new feature, changing something in the component, and then 10% in fixing the bugs and 20% on other stuff, and that's ideal. But if I look at my work, I was doing the opposite, for example, or something that I didn't expect, right? In how many meetings and not per se meetings, but in what kind of work in the infrastructure, in the prioritization on new feature I was doing, right? That was a conversation starter, because I had to ask myself, okay, I'm hired to do something, and I commit to do something else. And I'm spending my time in doing something different. What do I want to change, and how I can be more efficient in what I do? So it's more on the, productivity, still learning, it depends on the weather, depending on what I do. But on the efficiency level, that was a great insight. To challenge myself, to keep an eye on how I do the work, and if I do it right. But that's more non-technical role. But I had also to assist a lot of engineers, and the conversation were even more inspiring, because by simply having the data, you could have so much discussion about what is also working well. I was totally biased. I thought I started this research with the impressions that the engineers were not delivering value fast enough. But there's so much more that we are doing well that I couldn't see. So having the data is really helping you to be data-driven in what you do. It might be easy, but it is true, right? So it reveals you the potential inefficiencies or what you can change, and it's pretty intuitive, right? Because most of the changes we implement was not yet on the architectural level or technical level, but they were behavioral changes, right? We saw that the cycle time was incredibly high. It took like 2 weeks to fix something that could be fixed in 4 hours, right? Now, what was the root cause? What we had to do, we didn't know, no clue. But we built a Slack bot, so like a bot to notify the reviewer of the code when the submit is ready, right? And on average, without this bot, we measured that it took like 38 hours to review one change, right? By introducing this bot, a simply automation, like a funny character that tells you, hey, there's something you need to do, we were able to reduce the 38 time to 8 hours, so almost 70%, right? Did we change a lot? No, we introduced just a bot that is making them their life easier, because maybe they were just distracted or they didn't know that they need to review something. But by simply clicking, they could review the change, right? And that is saving a lot of time for them, because there are people waiting for the review, but you can ship the code faster, right? But yeah, it really depends on the use case. But if I had to describe my non-technical experience with these productivity metrics, it also brings the right focus, right? But yeah, we are learning from the developers and the engineers how they see an impact on the product, right? Are we building better product? Are we more efficient in what we do? Can we dedicate more time on other stuff because we automate what we are doing, or we enable more self-service capabilities. Those are things that comes into place. Yeah. And again, these metrics, we build them for the engineers. But of course, the managers, depending on the role, you might learn something new, right? Something insightful that you were not able to measure before. Yeah. Any other questions?
Only for the end of your presentation. Is that this yet? Otherwise, I'll keep it for the end.
No, it's the end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Or, yeah. Yeah. Let's make it official.
Related to DORA metrics, I work in a team of 5, and lately we had some disagreements on review time. It was in some cases like 4 days.
Yeah.
And we don't have DORA metrics implemented yet. So it became like a back and forth of, no, I did it, yes, I did not, whatever. It was a mess. What first step would you take to implement this?
Well, the first question is, did you discuss what was the review process in the team?
Yes, afterwards I wrote down expectations, and then we made rules like, okay, we're gonna do every morning.
Because why, like, what was the use case? Like, it took you mentioned 4 days to review.
Yeah, 4 days for the first review to come in.
And what was your expectations?
To have them at least daily, yeah. And then later we found that out, but it took a lot of screaming to get to that point.
But what was the problem? Why the review didn't happen? Or why it took so long?
Different reasons. Some said that they were busy on other work. Some said that they just did not see it. And some said that they did do it, and then, or they made a change and then waited for 4 days again. So then you're in a constant cycle of waiting 4 days between every little edit. Yeah.
So you don't need the metrics to see that something is not working well, right? And I think the first important things to do is to set the rules on the way of working, right? Because maybe each of the team members might have a different view on when a review should be done, right? Maybe 2 days is still fine. And I also discuss this with my team quite often, because I'm a product manager and I'm expecting something, but the engineers might have a different view, right? So we had to discuss what is our ideal scenario, what is the review process, and who is responsible for it. So we also are a team of 5, but I also manage other teams that are bigger, and we had to come up with our own solution, right? Because it really depends on the personality, on how your team is working, what you're doing, and maybe one thing to consider is to have one person every week responsible for the process. So maybe that is there to identify when a certain target, let's say that you agree that it's ideal to review one code that is simply with the lines and it's easy to review in less than 1 day. That's your target, right? That's how you define, we are the perfect team if, depending on what we're working on, we are able to review the code in less than 1 day. Let's see, right? Now, you can set this agreement and test it out, but if you really want to enforce it, you can have a duty officer and somebody's every week who rotates to make sure that that happens. There is also a skills building activity on being a leader, right? You're able to identify it before when something is not picked up, because maybe that person is on holiday, or maybe the person you're expecting to do the review is on holiday, in a lecture, in a meeting. And you might want to detect that right away and maybe discuss with the team, is there anybody else that has time now to pick it up? Something like that. That could be an idea, right? But it's really important to set the expectations and everybody needs to agree and commit and say, okay, we want to have a review process that is never longer than 1 or 2 days, right? And we stick for it. And every time we see that there might be a delay because I haven't picked it up, because I'm busy, or because I don't know how to review it, we should never underestimate the time it takes or the knowledge sharing that needs to be done. Because maybe somebody is ready to review it, but they don't understand the change, what is actually done, and they don't want to review it because it's it's already not meeting the expectations for a change to be in production, right? So you might want to set those agreements also in how you're going to address those issues, right? Because maybe it's not worth it to review the code if you think that the change doesn't need to be shipped to production, right? So you might want to agree on that too, right? What do I do if I don't know what to do, or if I don't agree with the change that needs to be implemented, right? So I'll definitely start with having the agreement and maybe consider first how to enforce it. Maybe this duty officer will not last forever, right? Because once it becomes more mature and it sticks and you can see the improvements, it will stay, right? You don't need a metrics to detect that, right? It's a behavioral change. It's something that you can easily influence, right? If somebody is able to recognize it, right? And it's a cultural thing in the team, right? If you are all open to discuss and to also speak up when there's a challenge or when somebody doesn't need to be reviewed, or if something needs to be discussed first, the way of working agreement will allow that. So I'll definitely set some, it's not a rule, it's a best practice, right? Because everybody, we don't have a lot of dependencies, but we are all focused in what we need to do. So if we have the agreement in place, we know that we don't need to discuss it. We don't need to argue on that because we decided up front and we agree and commit to that. And that will save you a lot of time if something goes wrong or if you need to justify why it hasn't been reviewed. So I would try also to quantify that in terms of time, how much time you are earning and saving from this activity, right? Yeah, I hope that answers. But... Any other questions? Okay. So we also have questions. Okay. Yeah. So we can end this session, but I'll stay here for a while. But thanks, everybody. I hope this was helpful. And if you're still interested, if you want to know more, we can follow up. Yeah. Thank you.